In the field of government, many people thought half a century ago that there was a natural evolutionary trend toward the democratic republic. But then many parts of the world turned in other directions towards authoritarian despotism. It is mere soothsaying to predict what form of government, if any, will finally prevail. That's what Ayn Rand has said. She said, you cannot predict what men will think. All you can say is that if they think this or that, these will be the consequences. But what will they think in any given age? You can't predict it. Likewise, great world religions like Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, with their tightly organized priesthoods and their closely reasoned theologies, have in the last 2,000 years won most of the world away from the unorganized pagan and tribal cults. Today, in many lands, they are losing ground to the pseudo-scientific philosophy of Marxism. Pseudoscience. Pure science has advanced enormously in the last 3 centuries, but looked at over the whole stretch of recorded history, the advance of science has been erratic. It has leaped ahead in sudden spurts, shot off in pseudo-scientific tangents like astrology and alchemy, become embroiled in religious and political conflicts, and sometimes been repudiated by whole nations. Then it talks about the arts, and some people are more into them and other cultures are less into them. But through all the ages of history, one human institution, technology, has plodded ahead. Always, 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 always. Except for the Dark Ages. The masses pursued bizarre fads and fashions. The engineers went ahead with raising their city walls, erecting their temples and palaces, paving their roads, digging their canals, tinkering with their machines, and soberly and rationally building upon the discoveries of those who had gone before. So, if there is any one progressive, consistent movement in human history, it is neither political, nor religious, nor aesthetic. Until recent centuries, it was not even scientific. It is the growth of technology under the guidance of the engineers. So we could call it engineering. Now we skip several paragraphs, the last paragraph of this chapter. Many readers already know of the doings of the engineers and inventors of recent times. They have heard of James Watt and his steam engine, John Augustus Roebling and his Brooklyn Bridge, or of George W. Goethals and the Panama Canal. I probably mispronounced his name. But few know about the remote predecessors of these modern engineers, about the men who laid the foundations on which their modern colleagues have built. Therefore, this book will be devoted to all these neglected early engineers, who, much more than the soldiers, politicians, prophets, and priests, have built civilization. Yay for the engineers. He makes a pretty good case for it. Now, I'll just make a smallest side comment, that the first thing you do in teaching anyone a lesson is get them motivated. So if you don't get them motivated, then they are not going to learn anything unless they are totally self-motivated. So the first thing you have to do is motivate your audience or your students or whoever, and he spends the first chapter giving us the motivation. Look how important the engineers are. He says the poets and the philosophers and the writers and everybody else, just kings and politicians and bureaucrats, go along playing on the stage doing their little thing. But all along in the background is the steady march of the engineers who keep everything going. So, interesting. And a similar case could be made for philosophy, and is a stronger case actually, because engineering falters as well. Dark Ages didn't help it. But that will bring us to chapter 2. We're going to look at the Egyptian engineers. Chapter 2, the Egyptian engineers. Serious archaeological work began in Egypt and Mesopotamia only about 100 years ago. It's 150 years ago now. But since then, much has been learned about the early civilizations of these lands. Although no definite date can be given to the beginning of either civilization, most scholars now believe that the civilization of the Euphrates Valley is several centuries older than that of the Nile. The monuments of early Egypt, however, are far better preserved and much more impressive than those of its sister civilization of Iraq. The Egyptians had abundant supplies of good limestone and granite in the bluffs that paralleled their river for hundreds of miles, and as most of the country gets hardly any rain, some of the monuments that the Egyptians built of these stones have lasted with but little weathering for thousands of years. On the other hand, the Euphratean plain has no stone, and its date palms do not furnish good timber. Any timber the Mesopotamians used had to be brought down the Tigris from the Assyrian hills. Moreover, kiln-dried or burnt brick, which stands up to wet weather, was costly because of the scarcity of fuel for the kilns. Therefore, it was used only to face the most important buildings. The interiors of the walls of these buildings and the whole of ordinary dwellings were made of sun-dried or mud brick. Now, although mud brick can be made fairly strong by drying it in the sun, for how long do you think you have to dry it in the sun? You've seen they have a little box a little wooden box, and what they do is slop mud in there, pack it down a bit, slop it off this top, make sure it's level, and they pull the little box up and they go and do it again. Brick after brick after brick after brick, and they just do it, rows and rows and rows and rows of them. And how long do you think they dry? How long? Although mud brick can be made fairly strong by drying it in the sun for 2 to 5 years before use, holy crap, it still softens and crumbles when wet. When a crack developed in the burnt brick facing of a Mesopotamian temple or a palace and was not at once repaired, the sharp winter rains dissolved the mud brick within, and the building crumbled into ruin. Hence, the upper parts of the walls of public buildings in ancient Mesopotamia have almost entirely disappeared. All we know of these buildings is what we can discover by digging around the foundations, which have been protected from complete dissolution by the piled-up debris of the upper stories. Now, they find this weird phenomenon in these ancient cities. It's called a mound, because the house disintegrates and eventually falls down, and don't have a bulldozer or anything. You just push the rest of the walls down as good as you can, level it as best you can, and build a new house. And they go up and up and up and up, some 8, 10, 15 feet above the level of the surrounding desert. And you go and you find these mounds, and you dig in them, and they have all the trash and debris from all these generations. Interesting. Therefore, to Egypt we must go to find great engineering works of earliest historic times still in recognizable condition, and, as it happens, to learn about the most ancient engineer whom we know by name. This is the man who invented the pyramids, the most famous monuments of the ancient world. Of all the 7 wonders of the world, only the pyramids survive to this day. Now he goes into what the 7 wonders were. This thing about knowing this guy's name, apparently he was named in the Egyptian tomb, my architect so-and-so. But the idea that he invented the pyramids is as giving lots of credit, you know. What were the 7 wonders? Several Greek writers, beginning with Antipatros of Sidon at about 100 BC, drew up lists of the 7 most wonderful engineering feats that they knew about. The usual list of wonders comprised 1. The pyramids of Egypt. 2. The hanging gardens of Babylon. 3. The statue of Zeus at Phidias at Olympia. 4. The temple of Artemis at Ephesus. 5. The tomb of King Mausolus of Caria at Halicarnassus. 6. The Colossus of Rhodes. And 7. The Pharos or lighthouse of Alexandria. Subsequent writers drew up their own lists of wonders, sometimes substituting other structures such as the walls of Babylon or the temple of Jupiter in Rome for some of those on the original list. Of course, classical writers could only list things that they had heard of. They did not know about the Great Wall of China, or the huge dam at Marib in Arabia, or the enormous Buddhist stupas of Ceylon, C-E-Y-L-O-N. If they had, their lists might have been different. Now, the huge dam at Marib, M-A-R-I-B in Arabia, was built by a captured Roman army. The Roman army that was captured by this other army, enslaved, and put to work building a massive dam that I believe is still in use. I think it's on Wikipedia. I think I found it. The Marib Dam, M-A-R-I-B, apostrophe, M-A-apostrophe-R-I-B. Continuing, the first recorded engineering work of early Egypt was the wall of the city of Memphis. This capital of the Old Kingdom stood at the point of the delta on the western bank of the Nile, 12 miles above the modern Cairo. Here the Nile fissions into a dozen branches, which writhe across the fan-shaped delta to the sea. A visitor of classical times, let's say the Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century BC, in crossing the Nile, beheld a lofty wall of pearly limestone. Over this wall appeared the upper parts of a forest of huge stone statues, 30 to 75 feet tall.